Hi everyone, Chaz916 here. Thanks for joining me. Okay, let's take a look at Druids, Wild Shape, and the debate. First up, what's not up for debate, and that is that Druids need to change. Why, you might ask? Druids are the least played class in D&D. Players like Druids, so it's a problem. In addition, the class is kind of overpowered and is very versatile compared to the other classes that are in the game. I mean, you can play anything from a range damage dealer to a tank to a battlefield controller, a healer. So why is the Druid the least played character class in D&D? The consensus seems to be Wild Shape. Well, on this we agree. For me, and from what I can tell historically and in fantasy, well, Druids just don't change shapes. They don't change into animals. Okay, but ignoring that, let's check out what the community and Jeremy have to say.
Feedback that we're getting on the previous Unearthed Arcanas.
We've seen some discussion about Wild Shape. What kind of discussion are we seeing there?
So the discussion on Wild Shape has been very passionate.
Yes.
And I always love to see that excitement about the game. 10 years ago in the D&D Next playtest process, we then also sent out a playtest druid that had some pre-built stat blocks that people could try out. Feedback then was also very vigorous, and we ended up going in another direction.
Right.
In the intervening years, a couple of years ago, we did some surveying on the 2014 Player's Handbook. And what's fascinating is one of the main pieces of feedback we got about Wild Shape was, could we have some pre-built stat blocks?
Right.
So, in response to that feedback, we sure enough have then, in the latest UA, provided that as an option. The thing is, the D&D community is huge.
Right.
And the community's tastes evolve over time. And so what we're seeing right now in the conversation is the community exploring collectively,
Right.
what do we want for the druid? And so we're seeing some people who definitely do not want us to go in this new direction. And then we're also seeing people saying online, this is the direction of the druid they've always wanted. What that means for us going forward in this playtest process.
Okay, so the debate. So the problem here is half the community want templates, the other half want to use monster stat blocks. The two big complaints about monster stat blocks. Number one is the sheer number of monster stat blocks that you have to go through just to create your character and to get an idea going. The other is that when you take on the form of a small animal, your animal form only has a few hit points. You tend to get kicked out of it if you take basically any damage at all. On the other side, the two big complaints about the templates, at least those presented in the UA, are that the stat blocks are too similar, they're kind of vanilla, and, well, basically they lack the features available in the various monster stat blocks.
Is as people then engage with the survey, write their feedback, rate things with their satisfaction, we then will thread the needle to create the druid that druid players really want. Because that, I mentioned that in our previous video, we're always looking for what is going to appeal to the people who love this thing most. So I encourage everyone who takes the survey, be upfront about what you think, be constructive,
Right.
and we will study that, and whichever direction we go in, there are a few common themes I'm already seeing in public discussion.
Right.
And now, before we make any design decisions, we want to study the survey feedback, because that's when we get the largest amount of feedback.
Right.
That's also important for people to know, that as much as people might discuss something online, often those discussions will cap out at maybe 100 or so people. When we get the survey feedback, That's from thousands of people. And so we always want to take feedback from all of these different sources, compare what we're seeing, and then plot a course. But establishing that context, what I'm already seeing is that whichever direction we go in, and because again, this is a playtest, this is not the done deal.
And that's the thing to remember when you're like watching these videos and when you're looking at the playtest itself. This is not the final form.
Absolutely
this is
not.
part of the conversation we're trying to have.
Exactly. Unearthed Arcana always is playtest.
Right.
And we have many times before introduced things in Unearthed Arcana that we then end up not publishing.
Yeah.
In fact, for the D&D Next playtest process for the 2014 Player's Handbook, we even introduced 2 versions of classes that we ended up scrapping entirely and starting over. That was the Warlock and the Sorcerer. Because of the feedback we then got, we decided, well, time to go in another direction.
Right.
So this truly is a conversation. And so I love, again, seeing the discussion, but also there's no need for anyone to fear that this is it.
Yeah.
Because for all of this, the conversation is the point. And
The goal is to make the thing you want.
exactly,
Exactly. And we're trying to move in that direction.
And so what I am seeing as a common theme, and that's what I'm always, because I want us to bring delight to as many of our fellow D&D fans as possible. I'm always looking for the common themes.
Right.
Like even when you have, because sometimes this will happen, and we've talked over the years in past videos, the two of us, about sometimes one group of fans will want something that is diametrically opposed to another group. And
Yeah.
whenever we're in a situation like that, I look for common themes. What do they both want? They might have sort of a top line disagreement, but there might actually be a lot they have in common. And that's always what I'm looking for. And so already when I'm seeing that the 2 main groups when it comes to wild shape, the thing they have in common is they want some fun texture that will bring distinctiveness to the animal forms. And
Right.
so with that in mind, if let's say we do move forward with having some custom built stat blocks for wild shape as we see currently in the Unearthed Arcana, I can see us absolutely then creating some customization options for those stat blocks so that druids can feel like there is more variation among them. Because I agree with feedback I'm seeing that the stat blocks are pretty similar to each other.
Okay, so here Jeremy is getting into the manager complaints about the templates. The stat blocks are too similar, they lack distinctiveness. Basically, they lack a lot of the features that the players can use in the monster stat blocks. And Jeremy just discusses his solution, or at least a solution, which he calls customization. Unfortunately, we don't get any details on it. I'm a little skeptical, but it might work. We'll see.
Right.
And it would be fun to bring some more distinctiveness to them.
I'm seeing a lot of feedback that is specifically about things like pack tactics. And, we do have one ability like flyby, which does exist for the flying version of wild shape, but that's the kind of stuff I think a lot of people are missing.
Also, some of that, I've seen similar feedback. Some of that also is about, I think, a little bit of the current Circle of the Moon in the playtest is a little too nuanced. And here's what I mean. I've seen some people say, well, I'd love for my animal form to be able to knock someone prone like some of the beasts do in the monster manual, or I'd like to be able to attack and grapple someone like some of the beasts do. The thing is the Circle of the Moon in the playtest does include that. And that actually connects to another question that we've seen about...
Okay, yeah. I saw this online a lot. People were complaining that they wouldn't be able to, they couldn't use knockdown and some of, the ability to basically grapple. And yet it was stated, in the subclass. It was right there. But a lot of people seem to miss this. I saw it a lot in online discussions.
Arm strike in the Circle of the Moon. But before we go talk about that, I want to go back to the sort of common threads I'm seeing between the two sides. Because if we stick with the pre-built stat blocks like we see here, again, I could see us making customization options. However, if most of the community is like, no, we'd like to stick with changing into these other monster stat blocks,
Right.
we can absolutely make that work. And then what we need to do to address the concerns of the other group of how approachable is the class. In our previous video, we talked about the fact that the Druid is the least played class in the game.
Right.
And a big part of that is because of the complexity of going through hundreds of beast stat blocks in the game to find out which one is appropriate for my Druid. Well, we can solve for that if we go back to the monster stat block design by having a method that we actually began to explore in Xanathar's Guide to Everything of the Druid having only a certain number of stat blocks available to them, and we could even provide some of those stat blocks right there in the Druid class write-up. So what I'm saying is we can actually bridge and make sure that the distinctiveness that both groups of players want is there, and then we'll see if we land with that distinctiveness being carried by custom-built stat blocks for the Druid or being carried by monster stat blocks from the Monster Manual and other sources, but curated.
Right.
So that a new player is not said, well, now go look at 100 stat blocks and find the one that is appropriate for your Druid.
Jeremy continues the discussion here about the Druid class. He starts off with the fact that the Druid class is the least played class in D&D, and that is true. But then he gets into some better stuff. He gets into the common ground, the things that both sides kind of want, and the reasons why they want them. And then he talks about how the class could be changed to suit that entire group, no matter which side of the debate you're on, whether you want templates or whether you want monster stats. Now, his solutions sound interesting. Of course, they don't go into a lot of detail, and as always, I'm a little bit skeptical, but I'd really like to see them, and I think we're going to get a chance to. At least in future versions of the Druid.
Now, let's go back to the unarmed strike.
Yeah.
So there was some question on, was it intentional that the combat wild shape feature in the Circle of the Moon lets you use unarmed strike as a bonus action as opposed to bestial strike? It is absolutely intentional that it's unarmed strike. And this is where the playtest document really becomes critical. In this playtest document, unarmed strike is a game object defined in the rules glossary, and it is a very special game object now that whenever you use it, you have three choices. You're deciding, am I going to deal damage with it? Mm-hmm. Am I going to try to shove someone with it, which can involve knocking them prone or pushing them away, or am I grappling them with it? Meaning, those things, knocking someone prone, pushing them away, grappling, are all contained under that very simple umbrella term, unarmed strike.
Right.
And so, yep, it's intentional, and it's intentional that the Druid in the playtest in beast form, if you have Circle of the Moon as your subclass, be able to do that as a bonus action, which then...
There's a flaw in unarmed combat, in my humble opinion. Now, unarmed strike works in its way for some animals, gorilla or bear, because those animals might attack that way anyway. They could knock something down, or try to grapple it, or just strike it. But for other animals, it just doesn't work. I mean, a rhino or a bull, they don't grapple. Also, I think that the unarmed strike should be used, but I think it should be a template. That template would then cover those kinds of animals and maybe have a separate template for things that tend to ram and other templates. we need more diversity in templates. And they definitely shouldn't be part of a subclass. Oh, and just as a side note, I have some issues with the unarmed strike, especially as it is in the general game. I'll get into that in a different video. Okay, so back to what they have to say, or what Jeremy has to say.
Then becomes really potent when you get to a level, especially when you can use multi-attack in the beast forms, and then also use your unarmed strike as a bonus action.
And then you can shove them. Then you can grapple them. So if you want to play that kind of like serpent-like character, you can do that.
You can, absolutely, in the current design.
And that is intended for when you are in a wild shape form.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Because everything in the game has access to unarmed strike. Like whatever your character sheet is or your stat block, you have access to unarmed strike. That's not only true in the playtest, that's also true in the 2014 rule set.
Can a first level druid use wild shape since it lasts for a number of hours equal to half the druid's level?
This is a great question. And so the context behind that question is people know there's the general rule in the game of rounding down. And so reading that, and because the rule doesn't tell you to round up or whatever, then applying the general rule, it would seem that at first level it zeroes out. The intention is that you don't round at all for this. And here we just, in a future version, we need to make that clear that no, you absolutely can use it at first level, and the intent is that it lasts for half an hour.
Why is the tiny creature feature at 11th level?
That is a great question. It has entirely to do with how resilient the new beast forms are.
Right.
So, in the 2014 Player's Handbook, you can become a tiny creature as a druid at very low level. The thing is, though, that the tiny forms that you can assume tend to have very few hit points.
Right.
And because in the 2014 rules, once you lose those extra hit points that the creature gives you, you're knocked out of the form, it meant that, especially in combat, you could not actually stay tiny for very long. And you also, by becoming tiny, were accepting the typically very low ability scores in those tiny creatures and the almost non-existent amount of damage that they dealt.
Right.
So it was purely a scouting form. So in this current playtest, because when you assume one of these animal forms, you still have all your hit points. You now have also a number of your combat relevant scores based on your wisdom modifier.
Right.
You are suddenly way more resilient than the rat that you could have turned into in the 2014 rules. And suddenly what that means is if you have all your hit points and a chunky armor class, because also the new animal forms have better ACs than most of the low CR beasts that you could turn into. So you have a higher AC, you have more hit points than most of those tiny forms. You can deal more damage than most of those tiny forms. If you could be tiny and stay tiny for hours and be in combat, suddenly that creates a lot of tactical shenanigans. For instance, you can move through the space of an enemy who is 2 or more sizes larger or smaller than you. Meaning, as a tiny creature with essentially all the regular hit points and AC and damage of a humanoid, you could run through the space of every enemy that you're fighting. Mm-hmm. That undermines a lot of sort of defensive tactics. Now, we of course are allowing it here.
Okay, some great stuff here. He starts off by talking about the first level wild shape dilemma. Some people apparently have problems figuring out that it was intended to be 30 minutes. Okay, then he goes into why you need to be such a high level before you can transform into a tiny creature. He makes a good case for, game balance and stuff like that. I do think it's going to need to be lowered. He then proceeds to make a really good case for using templates. After reviewing that, I'm really leaning towards templates myself, and I'm kind of hoping that things go that way. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to the next playtest version that we see of the Druid. Okay, so let's finish it up.
It's
Right.
here. Is it too high of a level? It very well could be. I mean, again,
Yeah.
this is a playtest. And we're playtesting to see where is the right place for someone who is this resilient to be this small. Now, if in the playtest feedback we see a lot of desire for this to be lower level, and the community wants us to stick with the sort of custom-made stat blocks, then we will adjust to make it so that you can do this at a lower level. If we go back to using monster stat blocks from the monster manual and elsewhere, well, then the issue vanishes, and then we just need to determine, do we go back to you getting a certain number of extra hit points from the shape that you assume, and then do you get knocked out of the shape when you lose those hit points? Like, that's the critical difference. That's why there is that difference in level. But there is also, especially in the playtest for the Circle of the Moon Druid, and similar to that unarmed strike thing that might be too nuanced for its own good, there is a lot of power hiding out in the Moon Druid's ability to cast abjuration spells
Right.
in beast form.
Yeah.
Because, again, that includes, in the playtest, healing spells.
Right.
If with Magic Initiate you've picked up the shield spell, it means you're casting shield.
People have been very keen on that
Yes.
concept as well.
So, again, you might not be getting, as a Circle of the Moon Druid, the hit point boost that you were getting before, but you are getting other boosts in the current playtest. We're going to see what mix is right. I think we will easily see another version of the Druid in this UA process, possibly more than one new version. We will basically iterate until the community collectively says thumbs up.
Yeah. And that's the point.
Yes,
The point is to be listening.
of the whole process.
Yeah. So
There you have it. Jeremy has laid out the options for templates and monster stat blocks, and his ideas on how to make the Druid better. So now it's up to us, players, playtesters, GMs. Please take the time to take the survey. Please let them know what you think, what side of the debate you're on, what your preferences are. Let them know any ideas that you have that you think might make Druids better. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining me today. Please remember to subscribe, just so you don't miss any of my content. I shall see you guys on the next one. Bye for now.